Today, we are very pleased to partner with the UN Office of the Special Advisor on Africa, UN OSA, in organizing today's webinar. The focus is on AI, which refers to computer systems that are designed to perform tasks that would typically require human intelligence. We have different experts. I'm sure they will really explain to us what it means to demystify the term. So today's theme is really very critical, crucial, and timely. As African countries, in our quest to accelerate the attainment of the SDGs and Agenda 2063 in Africa, AI presents a unique opportunity that could be harnessed to support sustainable development and durable peace on the continent. The team has shared a concept note which highlighted that by 2030, AI technologies could increase the global economy by 15.7 trillion, of which the share of Africa is estimated to be at 1.3 trillion. That surpasses by far Africa's share to FDI and to IFF put together. And these represent a third of Africa's GDP, which stood at 3.1 trillion in 2023. So today, this webinar provides a very good platform to garner various perspectives, good practices, experiences regarding how AI could serve Africa's developmental aspiration, how to bridge the digital divide and ensure that AI technologies are not concentrated outside the continent. I'm sure each of us has, in one way or the other, used AI in these days. So I will not really go through the usage. The concept not really has provided a list of potential use of AI. But we hope that through today's deliberation and discussions with our esteemed panelists, we will identify the good practices as well as the challenges facing countries in Africa to put forward recommendations for an effective and integrated approach to the responsible use of AI to achieve the SDGs and Agenda 2063 goals in Africa. Before I introduce my speakers, our distinguished panelists and speakers, I would like to share just a couple of housekeeping items. First, this webinar is being conducted in French, English, Arabic, and Portuguese. We have simultaneous interpretation. Just look at the button in the Zoom screen to choose the language you would want to really listen to. Number two, we welcome questions and comments from participants. Please use the chat and direct any question to any panelist you wish to, and we'll take the opportunity of the Q&A session to provide some responses or guidance. Finally, our colleagues have shared, and if it is not yet done, the link to the concept notes, the agenda of this webinar. You can find it on the chat. Now let me briefly introduce my panelists, today's panelists. I would like to send an apology from USD, the Undersecretary General, Her Excellency Cristina Duarte. She is right now on the plane. She could not really join us today, but she has requested her deputy, which is Mr. Jean-Paul Adam, to represent her and deliver the opening as well as the closing and stay with us. So that is to say that I would like to introduce first Mr. Jean-Paul Adam. He's representing Christina Duarte today. He has different hats, deputy, but also director of the policy monitoring and advocacy at the UN OSA. He will deliver the opening and closing remark. We have His Excellency, Mr. Pierre Goudiaby Atepa, with the former minister, president of the Atepa Group, and president of the Club des Investisseurs Sénégalais, which is a forum of Senegalese investors. He is very well known across the continent and beyond for the work done around architecture and investment. Our next speaker is Dr. Muhammad Zakaria Abu Dahab, who is the professor of international law and relations at Mohammed V University in Rabat, Morocco. We also have Professor Basma Makhlouf Shabu, who is the head of the Masters in Information Science and coordinator of the Archival Science Information Department of the Geneva School of Business Administration. We also have Dr. Melissa Omino, who is an artificial intelligence policy and data governance expert from the Strathmore University Center of Intellectual Property and Information and Technology in Kenya. Last but not least, we have Joel Wakaire, with the Associate Professor, Department of Agriculture and Bioresource Engineering, University of Nigeria at Nsukka. Also a project manager for artificial intelligence for agriculture and food system for a think tank based in Kenya, the African Technology Policy Studies Network. So you can see that we have a very rich panel, really excited to moderate the discussions. I'm pleased now to welcome Mr. Jean-Paul Adam, Director of Policy Monitoring and Advocacy, and Deputy to USG, who is actually traveling to give the opening remark. Sir, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Barassou.
Thank you very much, Barassou. I'll follow your example and wish everyone a Happy New Year. And thank you very much, Michelle. In my country, we can say this up to the end of January.
Welcome to this webinar on artificial intelligence. And as already mentioned, Your Excellencies, colleagues and friends, I'm delighted to present the warmest wishes of appreciation from the Undersecretary General, Christina Duarte, who unfortunately could not be with us because she had a flight that corresponded with the timing of this event. And I also like to thank our co-organizers, the Africa Capacity Building Foundation, and also all the contributors from the Office of the Special Advisor on Africa think tank network. So, dear friends, the premise of our discussion is very simple. Business as usual will not deliver the SDGs. We need disruptors that change the trajectory radically. This kind of disruption brings both opportunity and risk. Artificial intelligence is potentially one of the biggest accelerators to turbocharge the Sustainable Development Goals. But we also need to empower African policymakers, researchers, investors, entrepreneurs, and citizens to ensure that artificial intelligence delivers development. We cannot be complacent because intrinsic to the opportunity is the risk that artificial intelligence further entrenches the extractive nature of Africa's economy, or that artificial intelligence further deepens the development gap. Therefore, we seek to harness artificial intelligence as a transformative catalyst for Africa's development, where we can improve efficiency of existing efforts in education, healthcare, energy, agriculture, and other critical sectors, and where we can also build sustainable value chains within our countries. Before further considering this balance of opportunity and risk, let us recognize that Africa is not an artificial intelligence desert. There is already a lot happening. We note the significant research being led by the African Regional Center on Artificial Intelligence in Brazzaville, established with the support of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. We also note the groundbreaking research by a number of universities, including those represented today from Kenya, from Morocco, and from South Africa, and many other countries across the continent. And we note the numerous ways in which artificial intelligence is being deployed to improve development outcomes across the continent, from drones which are being deployed to monitor cashew crops in Ghana or to deliver medicines in Rwanda, or solar panels being repositioned for maximum efficiency by artificial intelligence in Namibia. We're encouraged from examples such as early warning systems known as Nuru in Tanzania. The examples are numerous, but I'd also like to touch on two of my personal experiences of African ingenuity using artificial intelligence. Before joining the Office of the Special Advisor on Africa, I was with the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa in Addis Ababa, and we ran a 2-week coding camp for young Ethiopian girls in Addis Ababa. In only 2 weeks, a group of young Ethiopian girls, using readily available artificial intelligence software, designed an image recognition tool that could be deployed in the fields as an early warning system for the arrival of desert locusts. I think this is an example of how, if the technology is made available on a wide scale and there is appropriate capacity building, we can deliver development results. I also, in my various roles within the United Nations, had the privilege to meet an innovator from Mali, Mamadou Gouro Sidibe, who used Google artificial intelligence technology to devise a voice translation tool, allowing thousands of small businesses in his country to access the internet using voice recognition, where they were previously excluded either due to illiteracy or due to the fact that the internet was not available in their local dialect. When we think of the mosaic of languages across our continent, artificial intelligence is one way in which we can further strengthen unity and connectivity and truly deliver the African continental free trade area. There are many examples of how African innovation is designing solutions to local problems. The missing link is to allow for systemic application of artificial intelligence as a lever for development. Artificial intelligence technologies could be an enabler in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and providing services that until now had been inaccessible to most of the populations, ensuring that vital services such as telemedicine, financial transactions, social services, government services, and administrative services reach those farthest and most vulnerable. Artificial intelligence technologies have the potential of realizing our quest for inclusivity, in particular addressing the needs of persons with disabilities, providing them with services and removing both physical and digital barriers, and allowing them to live full lives and participate effectively in sustainable development. And artificial intelligence may provide us with one of the most critical tools to tackle the impact of climate change, from optimizing the efficiency of energy production, land use, and reducing the cost of resilience and adaptation. However, the 2022 Government Readiness Index report by Oxford Insights warns that African countries rank lowest on the Artificial Intelligence Readiness Index globally. Among African countries, Mauritius, South Africa, and Seychelles are leading the drive. I look forward to the recommendations of today's event, but I would like to ask that we consider some of the following calls to action. Firstly, invest in capacity building at all levels to ensure that there is awareness and understanding of artificial intelligence and how it may be deployed in a cost-effective fashion. This means engaging all levels of education systems, while also investing in public education programs aimed at specific groups such as small and medium enterprises. Secondly, actively promote the availability of startup capital for local use of artificial intelligence technologies to tackle sustainable development priorities through local development banks. Thirdly, the development of regulatory frameworks which enhance access while addressing risks, in particular, building on the interim report of the high-level advisory body on artificial intelligence established by the United Nations Secretary General to advise the actions on a globally coordinated AI governance to harness AI for humanity and at the same time mitigating the risks, challenges, and uncertainties as artificial intelligence services are widespread and adopted globally. And fourthly, adapting national development plans to identify the most critical sectors where artificial intelligence may be deployed. Before concluding, I would like to suggest that if properly harnessed, artificial intelligence can allow Africa to address many of its structural disadvantages. The Office of the Special Advisor on Africa's recent flagship report, which was launched in November last year, demonstrated 3 paradoxes that limit Africa's development, but if properly addressed, can accelerate Africa's trajectory towards development and change Africa's economic model. Firstly, Africa has a financing paradox, where the continent struggles to raise finance, while there are 500 to 600 billion US dollars of unmobilized resources that leave the continent annually, partially through high debt servicing, transfer pricing, in some cases ineffective taxation with loopholes, and illicit financial flows. And if properly deployed, artificial intelligence can change the landscape for domestic resource mobilization by allowing us to better track these resources and use tools to mobilize resources that are currently not being mobilized at the national level. And I think Barasu already highlighted the extent of these resources. Secondly, Africa has an energy paradox. While having some of the richest energy resources, both renewable and in terms of fossil fuels, and yet is unable to provide reliable and affordable energy access, with up to 600 million people still unable to access reliable electricity. Artificial intelligence can allow optimization of energy investments and help address some of the critical hindrances for renewables, such as grid efficiency, intermittency, and energy planning. Ultimately, we need to reinforce our infrastructural base, and this will allow both artificial intelligence and other digital tools to be used more effectively. Thirdly, Africa has some of the richest agricultural lands on the planet, but has not as yet been able to ensure food security, in part due to the high inefficiencies in transportation and storage of agricultural produce, challenges which in part can be tackled by the judicious deployment of artificial intelligence technology. Finally, we must also look at the use of artificial intelligence in the context of our determination to deliver on the promise of the African Continental Free Trade Area. The AFCFTA is potentially a development multiplier, and the use of artificial intelligence to augment and analyze trade flows can allow for further acceleration of this opportunity. With the discussion of these opportunities tempered by cautiousness, I look forward to hearing strong policy recommendations on the responsible use of artificial intelligence in Africa for an inclusive, sustainable development, which is actionable and forward-looking, ensuring in particular youth empowerment and gender parity. Before concluding, allow me to also thank in particular the OSA staff that have put together this webinar, as well as all of the other agencies and individuals who have contributed. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Et je reviens vers vous, Barasu.
Merci à vous, Michel Jean.
Thank you, Michel.
Quite provoking. You've covered quite a number of issues, but very important is to say that Africa is not an AI desert. I think that is important. A lot is happening. There is just need to scale up some of them, really to make sure that it supports our development our development goals. Thank you, sir, again, for those opening remarks. Appreciate it. So I would like now to move to one of our panelists, His Excellency Monsieur Pierre Gujabe Atepa, to share his first thought around the theme. Excellence, est-ce que vous êtes prêt?
Are you ready, Your Excellency? Can you hear me? Yes, I do hear you. Thank you. As Jean-Paul has said, I would also like to wish you a happy new year 2024. I think there's still 24 hours left in this month. So I'd like to wish you, as I said, happy new year, good health. Sometimes I'm a bit perplexed when I take part in this type of discussion because, firstly, I'd like to say that I'd like to congratulate the Secretary General because I think that in the presentation made to us by Mr. Jean-Paul Adam, everything is already there. We know exactly what we have to do. And the real question is why we do not do it, why we may not do it, and why so far it has not been possible. So first of all, I'd like to say that one of the gaps is that we do not involve the private sectors in our respective countries, but in these types of exercises, perhaps not enough, because we are pragmatic people. But if the United Nations really hope to implement things, the United Nations has to involve the private sectors of our respective countries.
We are the ones who have to take responsibility to solve this issue because our problem is immense and the subject itself is gigantic. I also made a bit of a mistake in terms of timing this session. So I'm at home. I grab my phone. I have my kid who is chatting with people on the phone, watching YouTube videos. Now, this child, after having done this at home, that you want him to go to school and learn to read, to write, do his homework. People expect this child to do things the way I did 60 years ago. What we need to do is change the foundation. We have to change the whole system. And what's happening right now is that we're undergoing an extraordinary revolution. And we have to take this seriously. But in order to do so, we cannot be afraid of the revolution in the way that we handle these topics. This is a revolution. But the revolution begins with education first. Once again, we will not be able to manage this revolution if 99% of the members of our population don't have the education or the educational tools needed. And I was saying this a few days ago on a panel on the Francophonie. You can transform the concept of the Francophonie in education and get 3 million computers for all of our kids every day. I look to get students things like computers to those students who don't have those tools. I'm not even talking about AI just yet. I'm just talking about the basics, the basic technologies needed. When I was working with President Webb, we had started what we called cyber villages. so that the technology we needed could reach the villages and so that it could come from the villages. I was on another panel where I talked about smart cities. In my role as an architect, we're trying to build new cities, new structures, because that's where it's all going to begin. We need smart cities, and what we're trying to do is get 80-90% of our population connected with these cities. Let's talk about smart villages as well, though. We're so far along in this conversation about AI, but in order to reach that level, we need to, first of all, correct, or I guess maybe adapt our current definitions. We need to bring the digital tools as well to everyone. I think that if the United Nations were to take a resolution, because as you know, you can give $1 billion for war, but you can't give $1 billion for young African kids to access the internet. Even I have problems getting connected. So I would love it if the United Nations were maybe a little more pragmatic. And with working alongside the private sector, we can make the money and generate the jobs. But if you just want to talk with other politicians or other diplomats, it's going to be a really difficult process. I want to thank all of the panel members and everyone who has helped to open this session up. I'm excited to continue speaking with you. Thank you.
Excellency, I think coming from the private sector, you rightly said that you are very practical, pragmatic. We should go to the basics. Really get the education right, but also have the tools right. So we'll come back to you, Excellency, especially around the regulatory framework, what needs to be done really to get, the basics right, where we can write on AI really to support the development of our countries. The role of the private sector, because this is a business, definitely private sector should be at the forefront. Really, thank you so much for being very frank and very pragmatic, on the approach to those issues. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Dr. Muhammad Zakaria Abdul Dahab. We would like to get your perspective on the issue being discussed today. You are a professor of international law. Thank you, and you have the floor, Prof. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Diawara.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
I'm going to use French as tool of communication because my English is not perfect. So I will use la langue de Molière.
I will use the language I'm much more comfortable in. And Mr. Kujabi, we've been able to shorten what we've got going on here. I think that we should just go right to the most essential topics. I must say, I wanted to thank Jailaba Joubarte, who was my student, actually, more than 10 years ago. It was around 2007, 2008 in the law college with me, and I'm so glad to have the opportunity to be here in this webinar. And I do know that we have a very limited time here, and there's a big difference in time zone here. I will mention that here in Morocco, we just recently celebrated our New Year, our Lunar New Year, January 13th of 2024. So I am sort of still opening up the year, I guess you could say. But essentially, there are some fundamental elements that I think must be highlighted at the beginning. Being that I work in a university, I asked myself, first of all, at the African level, in our continent, is there an epistemology for artificial intelligence or for ICTs in general. In reality, what is concerning is that we see that there's a lot of intuition in the business world already, and I had worked for many years on the World Trade Organization that was at the beginning of the third millennium, and you saw these commercial wars with the United States, Japan, Korea, etc. And then after the end of the Marrakesh Accords, you saw the adoption of the Agreement on Communication Technologies. So we were able to integrate this at the WTO level, and we incorporated intellectual property as well as agreements specifically on information technologies. Now, this kind of inclusion was something that announced new structural changes, and that affected many countries that were not part of the original process, and they had to do something with these agreements, and they ended up including reforms and changes that were entirely unnecessary to them in their context. So with AI, I think that we're basically going through a whole new transition or a new transfer process. We know that there are different regions within Africa, the different needs are present, but we're talking about Africa in general, and so we can't really talk about the geographic politics, etc. But I think that the disparities are increasing, if anything, a lot more. And I think that the UN was the one that launched a world summit on information. I think back in 2005 was when that started. And this is the situation, right? I'm going to try and give a concrete example. In Morocco, just like everyone else, we went through the COVID-19 crisis, which obligated us to work at home. We had to do remote work. And we also saw that at the higher education level where I work, and when you do the math, just like Kujabi had mentioned recently, basically you don't really have the level of connection needed for people to do their jobs, to go to school. There was a lot of people dropping out of classes. There was a huge disparity. I guess I could call it vulnerability. COVID-19 accelerated an issue that we already had and really centered us in this issue. This is the problem of our reality. My fear in my capacity is to see that this is going to continue growing at an even higher speed. There's the theory that you've got the 20% of the population in the world that has access to AI, high-speed technologies, etc. But the other 80% of the world doesn't have access to the same amount of technology, or simply can't connect as well as the other 20%. So there needs to be a kind of unification here. I'm not talking about territorial unity, but we need to have some kind of a structure at the African level so that everyone on the continent can connect to and use these information technologies for the purpose of democratizing the region and increasing access to education, because I know that today some people would hear the word AI and wouldn't even know what you're talking about. Meanwhile, other people are much more familiar with the idiosyncrasies between all of the tools available. And I'm going to just do an incision here, I guess a parenthesis here. This is something that we've been looking at for a very long time. The world of international commerce or trade has been looking at how exchanges and different kinds of transactions are being affected by precisely this. And like I said, I've got a lot of experience in this world, but what we're looking at is rupture technologies as well. These are being used by the WTO, and customs organizations, they're using AI. It facilitates things. It's true. But when you get to robotics, that's a whole other thing. You're talking about automation. And so today, what we see is that the business world or the international commerce trade world is pushing us. Those are spaces that are pushing us towards adoption of these technologies, but there are issues. Now, it's true that the potential for Africa's development in this respect is humongous. But I just want to mention a couple of examples. It's not chauvinism here from Morocco that sometimes it's not that I guess how should I put this? Well, let's just say there are people who are trying to apply AI to agriculture. We have a huge food insecurity problem in the region, right? And if we're looking at the SDGs, and if we don't achieve those by the certain amount of time that we've defined, is we're going to have even bigger issues. There's the issue of the crises and the wars that are currently underway. That's affecting the reality in North Africa. So I think that these are all things that are so essential to take into consideration. And I have to say, I was astonished. I was kind of on a different planet, virtually speaking, which was in China, I guess I could say. They use robots for agriculture. It was incredible, especially when you look at how it's integrated in agriculture. I was thinking, okay, so if we're looking at 70% of the of the activity that goes on in China is already seeing the presence of these robots and AI, when in Africa we're not anywhere even close to that amount. I should say also very important. It's looking at these instances where AI is being used. It's a means towards something. Like for example, there's a series of 11 countries that are linked, that are part of ECOWAS, and that could be connected through the use of these applications and technologies. We could talk about how fishing and food security, energy, maritime commerce could be further developed through all of these tools. All to just to summarize, I'm trying to hit everything here. Now, we have the African Free Trade Area as the result of initiatives by the UN and African Union Summit. And also, I believe Italy is part of this whole initiative, the United States as well, and other African nations. So, does Africa need this kind of summit in order to achieve development? What it needs is empowerment to make use of the ingredients it has available already. I do believe in connective intelligence, but we've got to start with the basics: education, culture, frameworks have to be implemented. And I think that AI could become, as was mentioned, or I guess as you can see, as the theme of this whole session, it can be a turbocharge for action in this area. And I tried so hard to get everything in here in the 10 minutes that I've been given. Thank you so much. I'm gonna go ahead and let you continue. Thank you so much. We very much appreciate your statement, and thank you again for having. Thank you so much for having attended this session. Now, just to summarize, you want us to really focus on the foundation here, the basics. You want for us to have collective intelligence before we've got artificial intelligence. I think that we're definitely going to return to that. I will now move on to our next speaker, that being Professor Basma Makhlouf Chabou.
We would like to hear your perspective on the issue being discussed. You have the floor for 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for letting me participating in this meeting. I'm really glad to share with you these few ideas. Honestly, I'm really lucky to hear about these issues and challenging aspects in relation to Africa and AI. Honnêtement, le problème de l'intelligence artificielle de manière générale.
Honestly, the issue of AI in general can also be seen outside of the African continent. And I would like to return to a specific comment that I should say really caught my attention, the story of the perimeter of AI. Is it Africa or outside of Africa? So I can maybe
own experience with the students, and I'm actually teaching in Switzerland, and we are practically, I should say, each session receiving inscription requests to integrate our programs in IT and AI options. That's from Africa. And we have this great capital research, human research. So, la ressource humaine en Afrique est un capital.
Human resources in Africa are or represent a really important resource. We have a highly motivated and resilient youth that wants to integrate these complex programs. They want to participate in competitions with students who have always had access to infrastructure and resources with much greater ease. I would just say access to books in general, in addition to their access to technologies and labs. We cannot lose that from sight. We see that our youth are capable and demanding when it comes to preparing for the future. If someone from outside of this context enters Africa, they're going to have to really work hard to keep up. Now, I feel like our youth really stand out when it comes to innovation. They have really innovative projects. They have ideas that we have not that we haven't seen in other areas. They've been able to identify low-cost solutions to things, low-cost solutions that are accessible to everyone. And I think that that's relevant to our youth's capacity to really integrate effectively the new technological trends that arise. And I also want to talk about another element that I think is really important, the fact that AI cannot be, how should I say, integrated in African contexts without first fulfilling important prerequisites. That would be, for example, internet connection, which is maybe not necessarily a constant in our context. It's a variable. You may have connection in some areas and not in others, or if you have connection, it might not be stable. And you have to take that into consideration when you're looking at technologies that consume a lot of energy, for example. And this has a direct effect on the calculating capacity that we have in the area. So there's the element of variable or volatile connectivity in many regions. And we are talking about whole cities here. It's not just in the villages where that's an issue. There's this concept that there are some, highly developed cities in Africa, and although that may be the case, that doesn't mean you have guaranteed access to that infrastructure. You also have ethical factors. Why should we make use of AI? What is the goal? And up until when? What is the limit? This is the essence of unending discussions in multiple fields. I know that in Canada, that conversation has really been a thorn in the side of the Canadian government when, for example, taking in immigration requests. Now, we do still see a tendency, a trend at the government level where texts are being drafted to regulate these technologies. Technologies that make use of AI. Now, Canada is definitely not the only example. You've got the EU as well that published their main ethical guide on the subject. The United States is also publishing texts on the matter as of the last few years, and I think that these texts are arising mainly within the context of governments and private entities. I fully align with my Senegalese colleague in what he had said. We tend to demonize the private sector. I see that we have kind of adopted this perspective where we just start off by saying no when it comes to collaborating with the private sector. We want to work with politicians and the government, but it's important that we remember that there's also the academic sector there, and we can't do anything in the academic sector, which does the research, without being able to collaborate with the private sector, for example, because that's where the research is commercialized, it's made practical and democratized. These are stakeholders that must be integrated into the debate, and actions must not be carried out without the effective inclusion of these stakeholders specifically. The other matter that I wanted to mention during the debate is the paradigm when it comes to the approaches that we employ, that we apply in university environments. I think just some weeks ago we were still holding intense, heated debates on the use of ChatGPT when it comes to schoolwork or course design. Some of our colleagues are still carrying out this debate in 2024. They continue to believe that if ChatGPT is used at all, then we are going to be overrun with plagiarism and we will not be able to manage the issue. So we have to take into consideration how this is going to look moving forward. In the future, people are going to have access to ChatGPT, and they will have the use or the ease of using tools like ChatGPT and others like it. So, how are we going to handle this? Why not employ these tools, regulate them, see how we can use them to our benefit, etc.? We're really going to have to launch ourselves into this revolution. We're not just talking about a slight, moderate development. It's not a slight change. We need to really rethink the basics, see how this is going to affect the academic world, how education is carried out. Do I have the goal of teaching the student, for example, subject matter that they will learn by heart, so that they can vomit it back out or regurgitate that information during an exam? Or do I want to empower them to use these tools to learn absolutely everything? I think that there are huge assets there. I should say that I do have some slides here. So if that's all right with you, I will be presenting some projects that have been launched in the area of AI. Could you maybe limit it to 2 minutes? Yes, I can then? Yes, you may. You have 2 minutes. All right, 2 minutes. I will do my best. Well then, if I'm able to share my screen here, it should work just fine. Am I able to share my screen?
Bon, si c'est pas possible, je pense que
Okay,
vous
c'est pas
pouvez.
possible. All right, if it's not possible, I think that we can. Yes, I'll just go along with that. But I'd just like to say just a short comments about an innovative project that has had an impact on the whole question of archiving. And I think that it is cross-cutting in nature, and I think that it affects all of the sectors. It enhances quality, it enhances speed, efficiency, and a recent project on the applicability of AI in information. And this was launched with two people or two organizations, the University of British Columbia and another project that was used for Africa. It is smart translation of African languages, and this tool has very effectively translated languages, African languages, into English or other languages, and this is wonderful. Another example is ChatGPT in Arabic, and that was also very interesting to see. And this was carried out by African young people, Egyptian colleagues, and others in this group. I'm very excited to see this and to see this commitment on the part of the young people. I could not conclude without making a few comments on the work that has been done on international level on archiving and storage of information. And I think that there's quite a bit of development that is happening in this field. Thank you so much for your attention.
Prof, really appreciate that presentation, which again I think goes in the same line with the other speakers to really have the basics right. I think that is very important. And you've also highlighted the dynamism of African youth, really who are innovators, entrepreneurs, and are really working a lot in this area. One of the example you gave is the ChatGPT in Arab, but also the translation, the intelligent translation of what more than 500 languages, African languages. So that's really a great work. In my presentation of the panelists, I think I did not mention an important speaker, who is Maktar Sek. who is from the UN Economic Commission for Africa, and mainly the African Regional Center on Artificial Intelligence, because this is really the very first artificial intelligence research center in Eastern Africa. I think we want to really to hear from Mr. Sek. Mr. Sek, are you with us?
Yes, I am with you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, if you can share your perspective, I think we are running a bit, late. So we really want to hear from you.
Thank you very much. Let me switch in French, as too many people speak in French. Je crois que c'est un thème très important.
I think that this is very important. And all of the other speakers who have preceded me have talked about the importance of AI in Africa. They've also talked about the real challenges and the need for us to effectively use AI so that Africa can also be integrated into this movement. I'd just like to greet Professor Goudiaby while I'm at it. We are all convinced that AI can lead to great economic progress, economic development in the world and also in Africa. We are seeing that by 2030, AI is going to generate $15.15 trillion to the world economy, and that will be 1.3 trillion for Africa. And that will, of course, be very important for Africa's GDP. However, I think that this had to be mentioned. We need to have a critical mass of people who can use this AI to develop applications, and there are many applications that have been mentioned by Jean-Paul in his presentation, and were also mentioned by Professor Chabou in her presentation. We have a comparative advantage. It's extremely important within Africa, because 70% of our young people, 70% of Africa's population, by 2050 will be less than 50, and these are 40% of the world population of young people. But these young people have to be trained, and there are many challenges with respect to access to education. If we know that 44% of these 244 million children who cannot go to school live in Africa, and 90% who can go to school do not have access to internet. So we do have to put in place the necessary infrastructure. Only 37% of our population have access to internet in Africa. So what can we do to have connectivity for the rest of the population? And even when we talk about connectivity, what are they going to do with this connection? The rural world in Africa is very badly connected. So we have a great challenge in Africa. Challenge with respect to the policies that have to be implemented. Because we do have discourages in Africa where there are good things and there are bad things that are related to AI. For example, the ethical questions, the use of AI, there are negative aspects with respect to the impact of AI on society. So with this in mind, the UN Commission for Africa, in partnership with the government of Congo 2 years ago, launched the African Center on AI, which is based in Brazzaville in Congo. And this center gives us quite a few opportunities to the young people and the elites, as well as the private sector. And here I must add that the private sector is very important, because there cannot be development in Africa without the private sector's input. The private sector must put in place the infrastructure. We have to talk to the private sector to see what is necessary to ensure the that people, young people especially, are trained. So we have to involve them in all of the actions, in all of the actions with respect to Africa's future. The government have to play the role of facilitators to ensure that the private sector can invest in the capacity building in Africa. We have to have Africa involved in the fourth industrial revolution. Of course, we have the need to develop the young talents, for example, to ensure that the young African children have access to AI tools. We have to have capacity building, and the capacity building also for the private sector on AI. We're talking about smart cities, for example, as far as architecture is concerned. How can we use AI to build these smart cities? So AI in finance, for example, in industrial sectors. These are the lessons that we must learn, and this is the information that we must impart. So we have to see how we can better understand AI and how to see how AI can also have an influence on public policy for development so that we can have better understanding of artificial intelligence. Also, the parliamentarians. The parliamentarians are all the lawmakers, for example. They have to understand this technology. They have to understand how it can help in Africa. We also have to look at the measures that can be taken to ensure that the AI is used. Now, let us look at the commitment made by the government of Congo. We have had, at the beginning of the year, the president of the Republic of Congo has set up a fund of 10 million euros to help the actions of the center so that we can set up a village, an AI village, where we have present actors from the private sectors, multinationals, and others, all working together for the development of AI in Africa. And this is what I had to present. I think that we have to put in place the infrastructure that is of capital importance. We have to train the human resources. We have to involve the private sector in all of the strategies and policies for development. We have to facilitate these policies, the implementation of these policies. And these are the pillars of activities. We also have a policy for awareness building and information of the population in general on all questions that have to do with AI. And of course, we must not forget the question of security. Cybersecurity is necessary to protect the citizens, to protect all of the users of these networks, because AI is a world phenomenon now. We can see what's happening in the drones. So it is now AI has been used, for example, in warfare. There are things that are being developed that we cannot really master, and that is where problems may arise. We have many applications and many robots that be developed, and we must have a regulatory framework, because we do not master everything that can happen. The developed countries, Japan, United States, Russia, Europe, Africa, all of these countries, we do not all master all of the questions that have to do with artificial intelligence, and that could be very dangerous for the future of humanity. Africa must start a process of reflection involving all of the stakeholders. And I think that for this reason, I really welcome this type of discussion for us to listen and discuss amongst each other about the question of development of Africa. Thank you so much for your invitation and the possibility to participate. Thank you.
I think this intervention was very important, especially there is such a center that is offering such a very large support in terms of courses, but also, sensitization and the like. I think it's important really to get in touch with Mr. Sek. I'm sure we'll come back to you with questions on how you can support some institutions, but also the countries, especially to set this regulatory framework, because that is really the start. It's important since we are all at the frontier of knowledge with the world. I think we can really start and lead the process in that direction. Thank you very much.
Sure, thank you.
Let me call upon our next speaker, Melissa, Dr. Melissa Omino. Thank you for waiting. You have the floor, Doc.
Thank you so much. I do not mind waiting because it was a very interesting discussion. It was a privilege and an honor to listen to all the speakers who came before me. And I'm really humbled to be on this panel as well. I really want to focus on something that was mentioned earlier in terms of the Africa and African countries ranking really low in the AI readiness index. And I actually also feel like apologizing because I'll be speaking in English while everybody else has spoken in French. But I hope you'll forgive me for that. And as we think about how we can use AI to accelerate the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals, I really want to focus on that point of the readiness index and the 3 reasons that have been given for why African countries rank low. The 3 are, firstly, a lack of government initiatives, secondly, skills shortages, and most crucially, the availability of quality data, or rather the lack of availability of quality data. And I'm going to focus on the issue of quality data in the context of African AI, because that's what we do at CIPIT. At CIPIT, we look at AI through an African lens and a human rights lens, and we think about what the African ecosystem looks like, the African AI ecosystem looks like, and how it can spur innovation. So thinking about quality data, it's imperative to understand that artificial intelligence cannot function without data. Data and AI go hand in hand. But what is it about a lack of quality data in Africa, on the African continent? This has been an interesting conversation to have with local African developers. And I've heard a lot about the private sector being mentioned earlier. And for me, when you talk about private sector, I think about local African developers as forming the private sector sphere and not just big tech companies. And what they say is, yes, there is a lack of local African data. So I'm glad that we heard from Prof. Shabu about languages and language data sets and how some of that is being utilized, or how natural language processing is being utilized. But that is one of the areas where we have a huge lack of data sets in Africa. We know that ChatGPT scrapes the internet for data, and we know that because of the New York Times versus OpenAI case that's currently undergoing, which is all about intellectual property and how it collects data from articles that existed online. The question is, how many African articles exist? What do I mean by that? How many African articles in African languages exist online? It's very few. And I know that from personal experience dealing with the Masahane Foundation, which is a group of African AI developers. And when they were trying to come up with data sets to share openly with other African AI developers, and they could not find enough local languages online, and actually almost got into trouble, similarly to OpenAI in terms of scraping the internet for data. And that's a classic example of the JW300 dataset from Masahane that cannot be utilized by Africans, even though it is an African language dataset. Why? Because the copyright owner does not exist, is not an African. The copyright owner actually is an American copyright owner company. I won't name them. If you want to find out, you can Google the JW300 case and find out what that means. That's the first indicator of what's going on in Africa. The second indicator is that local African developers have decided to collect the data themselves. That means going into the field and collecting voice data and collecting language data themselves. But the problem is, another problem that's prevalent in Africa, the lack of funding or the lack of capital to be able to do this type of collection. So what happens? It normally falls within a research sphere. So you'll find that local African developers are funded to collect this data. And whoever pays the piper, determines the price, right? The piper determines the price. And the price of that is, it has to be open. It has to be open data. On the face of it, open data sounds lovely. It's laudable to have data sets that are open for use for everybody on the globe. But if you look at it, if local African developers are getting funding to collect local languages and make them open, are they not excluding themselves from competing with other AI developers? Because if it's open, it means big tech can access that, and big tech can then make solutions for Africa, excluding local African developers from providing those solutions. What's wrong with that? That's a problem because there's a lack of local context in the solution that will be produced. We've heard that algorithms are man-made. Currently, we are not yet at the point where algorithms can make themselves, but they're man-made, and therefore they have biases. If we have somebody outside an African context creating solutions for Africa, then there will be biases present in that algorithm. The solution for Africa will not be a perfect solution, or might not even meet the requirements of what we need on the continent. So these local African developers are saying they're happy to collect the data, they're happy to share the data, but they would like to modify how they can share that data, right? So the recommendation is, how can we come up with a data sharing regime specific for AI or algorithms in the African continent that allows Africans to share with Africans, but that does not price them out or exclude them from innovating because it allows access to people who are already miles ahead of them in terms of development and innovation. And a good example of how we could achieve that is what the Maori in New Zealand have done. They have a unique license for anything that touches Maori cultural aspects. And that means that you can only loan Maori data. You cannot own it. It's only on loan to you. And you have to ensure that you do not do any harm to the Maori community. And you also have to ensure that the culture of the Maoris is upheld within the use of that data. So that's an example of an open license with restrictions that could be used. So that's just one community, a little bit far away from us. In Africa, we have so many tribes, we have so many cultural aspects, but we do have an organization known as the AU that can assist us in coming up with at least a continental strategy for the sharing of data that would allow the collection of data that would then allow us to push ourselves up on that AI readiness index. And the AU is working. There's an AU AI continental strategy. I do not know how far it is. I just know it exists. But I wonder if thinking about data and how data can be handled is on the forefront of that AU AI strategy. The UN, obviously, is another body that can really help consolidate how the African continent can look at or think about data and the access to data specifically for algorithms. And this can be in line with what we're calling responsible and ethical AI. It could have a bearing in terms of the data sets that are utilized, the use of that data set. What about the benefit sharing with the community that has provided that data? I'm famous for saying that I do not like the phrase data is the new oil, because oil is a natural resource that existed thanks to God, the universe, whoever you believe in. Data comes from people. You have data, I have data. It is purposely collected. It does not exist in a vacuum. You can trace it back. What happens to those of us who lend our data to the private sector to utilize, to make solutions? Do we end at being the generator of data, or should there be at least some compensation that we get, especially if you come from a particular subsect, such as a very small cultural community in Africa? An example would be the Maasai. And another example would be the Khoisan. Shouldn't they get some benefit from this type of data and how it's utilized. Because if a solution is created that's using their language, which is part of their culture, I really do think that that needs to be utilized. And this is going to be a reality soon. I want to give an example of where language data is being used. We can think about, and outside of a commercial aspect, I'm thinking about AI for good here. So if you think about the provision of government services are really how we can beat or ensure that we attain some of the sustainable development goals, meaning we beat poverty, right? And government services are now evolving to become digital government services, no longer analog presentation of services. And in order for them to be accessible and inclusive, they should be provided in the languages that the citizens in each of the African countries speak. We've heard about lack of infrastructure, we've heard about issues about access to the internet, etc. But another issue here is accessibility in terms of language. So an example in Kenya is the Linda Data chatbot that was launched last week on Friday by the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner. It is a chatbot that allows Kenyan citizens to access the Data Protection Office to find out about their rights with regard to their data, but also to have complaints. And also if you are a small business and you want to be compliant, you can use the chatbot to understand what are your obligations and how do you register, etc. This chatbot is available in 3 languages. First is English, second is Kiswahili, which is a national language, but it's also available in Sheng. And Sheng is the corrupted version of Kiswahili that the young people in Nairobi especially speak. So it's a mixture, it's the cool, hip language that all the young people are speaking. This chatbot can be accessed in Sheng because the innovators of today are the young people who speak this language. And in order for it to function, it had to go and collect data from the community. But the beauty of it, because it was a local innovator, a local AI developer who created this chatbot for the ODPC, they already had this question in their mind about how do they compensate the people, the community that they obtained the data from, which is an ongoing discussion. They also are ensuring that it is a responsible algorithm, but by ensuring that there's trust there in how it goes back to obtain information from the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner and not scrape the internet for information. And so it will not hallucinate. And it's really a great example of how we can utilize AI to beat an SDG, but also how we can think about data differently, ensuring accessibility, but also thinking about how communities are involved in the development of AI. I don't know if I've gone over my time, but really that's really what I wanted to touch on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doc. I think that's again going to the basics. Really, data is the input to whatever we are doing on AI. I think it's really important. The issue around data, I think, is a challenge across all the sectors. Thank you again for really focusing on that very important and strategic element of AI. Appreciate it. So we have our last but not least, we have Joel Wakaire, who is from the ATPS, a think tank based in Kenya. You have the floor. I think we are running out of time. But we still want really to hear your perspective before we move to the question and answer sessions, because we have some questions in the chat. Thank you. Doc, you have the floor. Are you with us?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm with you. I want to thank all the discussants. I'm personally happy to be here. It's a privilege. ATPS is proud to be associated with this discussion because for 24 months plus now, ATPS have been involved in the AI4D project. The AI4D initiative is looking at how to apply AI, deepen the use of AI in various sectors, health, agriculture, education. But ATPS is focused on agriculture and food systems. And in everything we are discussing, all of us here, when the dinner time comes, you have to leave whatever and go and eat. So everybody is interested in also how to increase food availability. And apart from that, we want to make sure that in terms of poverty, it is reduced by agriculture. So ATPS is a think tank network, and we are looking at helping develop the right policies, regulations, and create an enabling environment for the use of AI. We are in over 30 countries, 27 in Africa, and 3 in diaspora, Australia, US, and UK. But specifically with this discussion, I want to acknowledge also the Executive Director of ATPS, Dr. Professor Nicholas Ozo, who led this initiative. I'm privileged to be in this team, coming from University of Nigeria, and with a passion to drive Africa's development. So it's a privilege to be here. So in all, the discussion have talked around Afrocentric initiatives. I want to use that word, Afrocentric initiative, a decolonization approach, because it seems initiative, as Melissa mentioned, that he that pays the piper detects the tune. So if you look at the highest donors in technology promotion in Africa, it's not the government. It comes from donor agencies and private sector. So ATPS got this initiative from AI4D, IDRC Canada, and CEDA, and we have implemented a very robust project. Our project had an objective to deepen the understanding of how to develop, deploy, and scale responsible AI. I would have given, I had a presentation I prepared, but because of time, let's just talk about it. So then build the capacity of African innovators, researchers to develop and deploy, and then inform Africa and international AI policy. And that is why we're happy we're here. So we want to discuss based on the lessons, practical lessons in the field. One thing is that Africa has the capacity. In terms of capacity, we have the capacity to utilize AI. But the question is, what is the pathway? I want to show you something that I noticed from the current ongoing African Nations Cup. If you take a look at one advert, if you have a critical eye on AI, you find that there is a total advert that have removed human in the loop. And that is the advert that shows an old engine transforming to a robot running along, and you can see some children running, and that robot then transforms, picks oil, and goes into a new vehicle. You can see in that process, there is a disruption, human in the loop. And that is why people are afraid that if you come with these generative systems, you then displace people, you displace jobs. And then the rural people are afraid to adopt it because they say, if you adopt all these robots, we that are farmers do some manual jobs. How do we cope? So ATPS and partners, Kumasi Hive and ECP, look at the Afrocentric pathway. And that is starting with envisioning. We must understand that we are a diverse community. And as a diverse community, there must be gender equality and social inclusion principles embedded in the development pathway. And so when we talk about inclusion, we recognize that the 60 to 70% of all, when you talk about people who produce in the agriculture and food systems in Africa, you find they are from the rural poor. They are the ones that are feeding Africa. And so when you talk about technology adoption, especially the women, they are the losing end. When you have new technology, the adoption rate for the women is very low. So we must have to think about envisioning the pathway for adoption and deployment. And so that envisioning made us to make sure that we have equitable partnership in the grantees we were selecting. We made sure we're intentional about partnership. And that partnership is really what works in development. Let me take us a little back to IoT. IoT is near AI. In fact, we can say we transitioned from IoT to AI. How far has Africa adopted the use of IoT? you will see that there is still a generation gap. In fact, if Africa utilizes the capacity of IoT, you can see a lot of good things happening around climate adaptation, because we have IoT systems that we can use to detect temperature, relative humidity changes, and even generate data for predictive analytics. So when we are now adopting AI, so we must be careful to make sure there is no exclusion, but an inclusive development. And so we had to train these grantees in various aspects of responsible AI. Remember that even in the development, in our discussion, we have not even looked at environmental impacts of developing large language models. If you go to some places, especially for some who trade in crypto, you find out that they have power systems on 24 hours. Where are these power sources coming from? Are they environmentally friendly? So you also have environmental impact of adoption. So how do we build the capacity of African developers to understand that in the responsible AI pathway, we must understand our carbon footprints. You cannot just be producing and be destroying the environment. So we have to train these grantees in understanding how to track their carbon footprints while developing these models. And we also train them how to gather data responsibly. And so today we can boast of having over 20,000 data sets of agricultural plants that are available, but it comes also to what my friend from Strathmore mentioned. How available? If we are making it open, who is benefiting? What is the intellectual property of those data? And so we remember in an earlier webinar, we had the intellectual property rights discussion. So we should understand this. And so when we went deep, we could see development coming out from such capacity building. For instance, we have a project in Kenya that developed something unique, the post-mort tool that can be used to detect the early onset of white flies, that is tutor, and that is done by geospatial research. And in Nigeria, we have also a unique project where you have a real-time plant health monitoring using a Raspberry Pi. The system captures data, analyzes the data, and can inform the farmer that this is a healthy plant or this is a diseased plant in real time. But again, the problem of data availability is something we face. So in all, I want to summarize in all because we are behind schedule.
Yeah.
In all, Africans can do it. But the question is, can we be intentional about building the capacity of Africans? Can we be intentional about bringing up the policies, the regulations that create the enabling environment? Can we be intentional about focusing on the rural poor to make food available, to create more jobs with AI? Yes, AI can create more jobs. So we should not look at it as disruptive. It is assistive in nature. And so with the right policy environment, with the right capacity, in terms of understanding responsible AI, practices and principles, we can succeed. I believe that Africa can do it, but we need to think inside and pool our resources together and not work differently. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Doc. I think that was the interesting intervention, sharing what ATPS is doing on the ground. So a lot is really happening and it's really possible. So we hear your call for having Afrocentric initiative and being intentional about what is being done. So we have a couple of questions. I think we have 20 minutes or so or less before we finish. So I would like just to check with our different panelists if they can really take any of these questions. The first one is on why do government institutions in Africa not funding Africa research to promote AI? I think Joel or Melissa, probably you can come in if you wish on that question, or anybody The second question is working with politicians to promote development might be hard, and that private sector need to be the driving force. Why so? Yeah, if you have His Excellency, probably if you are on the private sector, you work with government. I don't know if you can just share your thought on this. And we also have another question around AI and job losses. Say that it's really focusing to take place, that AI will take some jobs. If you have really any thought around this, is this something that we can foresee, or yes or no? Anybody can take that, I think. So let me stop there. Yeah, Basma, if you want, you can also take that one.
Yes,
So let's
well,
stop
maybe
there.
I
We
can.
see how we go with the time. Just 1 minute, please.
A few words about the first question about why African governments are not supporting the scientific research. So it's a question of priorities, I think. And honestly, this is very important to mention here. Maybe the way we are planning our priorities in governmental side is not really matching with the needs and the expectation and what people in Africa wants to be. Maybe this is the mapping that we need to reach. Mapping between the expectation and ambition of African people, African young people, and the priorities and action and programs from the side of governments.
Thank you.
Can I jump
Melissa,
in there also?
Yes, please, you can come in.
Yes, I definitely agree it's an issue of priorities. We need to understand that the problems that existed before AI are still existing and are still being tackled, and AI is coming in as a tool that might assist in that. So government is catching up in terms of how can it utilize this tool. What I do know is also government just doesn't move the way private sector moves. There have to be policies and strategies that allow it to fund AI initiatives. And if you look on the continent, very few countries have AI strategies, let alone talking about policies that can be implemented. But that's the first place. If we can think about AI strategies, national AI strategies that call for funding to be introduced, then I think government can then come in as a good player. But the funders of government are making strides to partner with governments to fund. So I think if you look a little bit deeper, you can see that that's starting to happen.
Thank you for that. Your Excellency, you will want to come in, share your perspective in any of those questions.
Yes, can you please repeat the one on private sector?
Okay, this one, it's saying that it's difficult to work with politicians to make things happen, and that the private sector should be the driving force.
Well, that is very true, but I think that if I may suggest that the UN partners with the private sector. I just give you a very simple example. I'm trying to put up an artificial island called Smart Island, where I want people to develop for the continent everything that deals with IA and other technologies. We need to partner with the big ones, Google, you name it, Amazon, etc. If we would just had a very simple push from the UN to say, yes, we approve of this project, or we are working on smart new capital cities. As you all know, because it's in the news, the government of Gabon has decided to build a new capital city, and I was invited to make a proposal. A new smart capital city is something huge, because then you're building a city for the future.
And we cannot do it alone. I mean, I have all the stuff that is needed to do. As a matter of fact, we did the design, we did everything. But we need the input of organizations like yours to say, yes, we approve of this, or yes, we want to be part of this. And you do just what you're doing right now, try to see all the intelligences that can come and feed this new city, because whether we want it or not, all capital cities in Africa will double their size in 25 years. The chaos of Kinshasa, everybody knows, and we're working in developing a new city for Kinshasa, smart city, but we cannot do it alone. If you people, the UN, would come and partner with private sector, then together, if we see the governments, then they take us more seriously. So again, it's a kind of partnership that we want to do. I would just like to add that, et je vais le dire en français, peut-être c'est plus simple.
And I will say this in French. I invite you to bring together states to talk about education in the context of artificial intelligence. If we don't do that, we're going to end up 30, 40 years behind. And so organize right now all of the states so that, I had a friend who said, what's the point of having your baccalaureate at 17 years old? Maybe now you can get it at 12 years old because of artificial intelligence. Why lose those 5 years when you could start being a productive member of society? This is the debate. And we invite you all to talk about this, to have a conversation about education within the context of AI. Thank you so much, Excellency.
Can I come here? Just in 1 minute, please. Okay, just 1 minute. Thank you very much. I think for the first question, we can't say the government doesn't have interest to invest in the innovation on AI. We have seen a lot of development after the COVID, and now a lot of governments start investing in AI. You can see a lot of incubator, a lot of startup fund adopted in several countries. I think now the government is ready. Several governments are ready to invest in AI. I think what Doyen Gujabi highlight is very important. We have to rethink our way to organize the education across Africa. And we are organizing at UNECA the Africa Business Forum on 19 February, focus on how we use science, technology, and innovation to boost to the African education. It is something we can touch by, but I fully agree with Professor Gujabi. We can look at the opportunity to organize this forum, very important. As well as I think we have to bring the private sector on board. And the UNECA work, it is to work with the private sector also, and also to try to bring the government. If it is a very important project, it is no doubt we can work with government to bring them to these projects. I liaise with you, Professor Gujabi, for this, and with OSA also to see how we can work together on this very big and important project for the future of Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think all our speakers, Prof. Zakaria, I don't know if you are able to touch on
just a few words. Je vais dire en deux mots. L'intelligence artificielle n'est pas.
I'll just speak very briefly. AI is not a choice. It is a true need. This is an irreversible change. We know this. It just has to go hand in hand with regulation. We need to have a way to adapt it and correct. We cannot forget the human and social resources in the area of commerce. And I think we need to democratize, as we said previously, like what happened with cell phones. This was only available to a certain population in the beginning, and then it became something that everyone had. We have to remember to include our youth. I think that UNESCO some years ago already launched some initiatives hoping for a more just context at the global level in this regard. Thank you so much, Professor.
I'd like also to invite David with the, from the permanent representative of Nigeria to the UN. Sir, if you could, just in 2 minutes, I don't know what you are touching on, but if you could also touch on the jobs or, the coordination that need to happen, because there is a lot of things going on around AI on the continent. So, yeah, but we want really to hear from you, your perspective in 2 minutes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know we are out of time. I would like to express my appreciation to the panelists for the very insightful presentations. Indeed, the importance of AI cannot be overemphasized. And you said I should touch on the coordination on our own part in the sub-Saharan region of Africa. Nigeria is very much committed in artificial intelligence. We've had a lot of substantial progress in our banking sector, where we have the bank verification number to check the fraudulent activities, so to speak. We have collaboration with security agencies as regards the international travel documents, where it has been upgraded to include a certain unique number peculiar to individuals to check insecurity in the country. But then again, I did hear one of the panelists mention funding. Funding is very critical. Of course, energy is a prerequisite to have sustainable AI, especially in Africa, and accessibility, affordability, especially in the rural areas, because if you don't have funds, if the simple ordinary Nigerian doesn't have funds, they can have access to have phones and gadgets and of course the AI platform. But one of the panelists did mention empowerment, and what we are doing, we've tried as much as possible to create an enabling environment for individuals and civil societies to thrive. One of such platforms is being utilized by the Onyoma Chukwu Empowerment Foundation, also known as Empower One. They've done quite a lot as regards empowering young Nigerians through skills acquisition. And very recently, they did hold a novelty football match to promote good health and well-being and reduce inequality and the synergy between education and sports. And I know you're out of time. I would have loved them to share in 1 minute or 60 seconds to share some of what they've done briefly in AI as regards, of course, we have quite over 200 million population, and AI in this part of the world is very useful as regards the way forward for the world. If Nigeria or sub-Saharan Africa is left behind, it will be a big shame, but we're doing all we can. So I would appreciate, moderator, if you could, in 60 seconds, allow the Onyoma Chukwu Empowerment Foundation to share some of their initiatives and deepen partnership as well. I yield the floor, please. Thank you.
Sure.
Dr. Won is online. If Dr. Won, if you can open his mic for him, Dr. Won, please. If you can open, go through the attendees. Dr. Won is online. If the moderator can open the microphone for him, please.
Can you allow him just for 1 minute, please?
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir, you have the floor for 1 minute, please.
Okay. Thank you, moderator. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you. I represent Onyoma Chukwu Empowerment Foundation. I've already sent a message to the questions area. Frankly, it's a foundation that has been involved in engaging young people in Southeast Nigeria and Northern Nigeria precisely on how we can make this part of the world AI ready. And what we've done in the last 2 years precisely is getting young people together and training them using professionals in that space, the AI space, to empower them. But part of the handicap obviously is not unconnected to what you find in this part of the world, which is technology. Sometimes you are done with the training, you cannot give them anything to continue their work with their laptop. Sometimes they find themselves in environments where there is no power, and this has limited the ability of the foundation significantly for what it's been doing in the last 2 years. And that is why when we found an opportunity to engage in this type of interaction with people who have been involved over the years, we felt this is the right platform to present what we've been doing and also partner with people that are already in this space and how we can advance AI. Yes, Nigeria is doing very well, relatively, but at the rural areas, things are just not moving. So we are enhancing our work in the rural areas, especially in the southeastern and northeastern Nigeria presently. And that's
excellent. Dr. Wonu, I think what I would suggest, if you have a website, you can share the link in the chat.
Okay.
And definitely, yeah, we all will get in touch. The organizers will get in touch for further discussion and for the upcoming webinars as well. I'm sure we'll dig deeper into what is being happening. Thank you so much. Again, we are running out of time. I just would like to thank our panelists really for their kindness in terms of ideas, for really spending the time with us and sharing the initiatives. We had a lot of questions in the chat box, so we were not able to respond in live to all of them, but we'll make the effort, if especially we have the email, to respond to them with exactly what need to be responded to. At this juncture, I would like to call on my sister Jainaba just to give, a kind of sum up of what's been happening, but also the next step after this webinar. Thank you, Jainaba, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Basu, for excellently moderating the session. And thank you, panelists. Mr. Tepa, Excellency, I hear you very well. The United Nations hears you when you talk about pragmatism, when you talk about a bigger role for the private sector. Effectively, this is what the Secretary General says when we say, and Mr. Jean-Paul Adam when he says, we cannot have business as usual, we must have disruptors. And I strongly believe that the smart cities that you have so cleverly innovated would serve an example, a bright example for Africa in its exchanges, and would be cross-fertilized with other parts of the region. And Professor Zakaria, bonjour, Excellence, et vraiment merci vraiment d'être.
Good day, and thank you so very much for being with us and for participating in our debate. I completely agree with when we talk about the effective integration of AI.
Very important to reduce vulnerabilities and accelerate development. And Professor Basma, thank you very much for stopping the flight to make sure you attend. It was very, very resourceful that you got here to be with us. So I do agree with you when you talk about the immense capital, the youth population of Africa, which is an immense capital. And that has to be tapped in order to reap the youth dividend. Also, I agree with Mr. Secker, who talks about accessibility, who talks about capacity building, and especially regulatory frameworks. Because at the United Nations, we're interested in moving forward, but we're also interested in moving forward in terms of what is right, in terms of human rights, in terms of avoiding violations and biases, and deepening vulnerabilities. So we hear you very loud and clear. And Mr. Wakairi from ATPS, we hear you very loudly when you insist on SDG 17, that is partnerships. Without partnerships, none of this would come to fruition. And we're also it's very important that the AI initiatives are Afrocentric. That is key. And we have to ensure that Africa's development is really front and center, and it's not business as usual where everything goes to the other side and we're always lagging behind. And Dr. Melissa, thank you very much. And I hear you very, very loud when you insist on data, when you insist on skill sets. Without data, without skill sets, none of this would really materialize in the way that would be beneficial for us. So frankly, it has been an amazing, amazing discussion, and it has been timely, and I thank everyone for being here. The discussions has been fruitful and inspiring, and it has set the stage really to get this moving forward. As you have seen, you have member states here, you have the United Nations systems, and you have other stakeholders. So all of these discussions today would assist them in making their decision and in putting this further. And as you know, the United Nations is working towards the Summit of the Future, which is going to be held this year. The policy recommendations emanating today would feed into those processes, would also feed into the high-level political forum, would also feed into the EcoSecurity Forum, which I'm the coordinator for. I'm leading the Africa region as regional session. And it will also feed in the General Assembly deliberations, especially in as it regards to Africa's development. So it has been extremely exciting, pioneering, groundbreaking, and you have all really hit the nerve centers of everything that we had set out to do. And the smart cities, I'm extremely excited to really see that and see it materialize. And the fact that you call on the United Nations to be a partner, that is exactly what we are here for. That is what SDG 17 is here for, partnerships. As you would know, the United Nations would not be able to do everything. The private sector would implement, the governments would implement. So we are here to receive our marching orders from you. What do you need? How do you need it? And we all move forward in these directions where we would keep our promise of leaving no one behind, of leaving no woman behind, no child behind, of leaving nobody vulnerable. By 2030, vulnerability should really be a thing of the dinosaur era. Everybody should be on the same page in terms of development, in terms of human rights, in terms of all the securities that one needs to thrive. So the Sustainable Development Goals must be achieved in Africa. And with the support of all the stakeholders, we all believe in this. So from this, we would have a report condensing the recommendations. And as you would know, it will feed into the high-level political forum where the national voluntary reviews would come in and assess the SDGs. It will feed in the United Nations General Assembly debates, and it will feed in the EcoSecurity Forum. And we would all touch base further down the line to crystallize further the ideas, to develop further the ideas, to flesh them out. And we're extremely anchored, happy that you have all connected from all parts of the world. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, from wherever you're connected from. And now I will yield the floor back to the moderator to yield it bien sûr to Son Excellence, Monsieur Jean-Paul Adam. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jainaba. I think that was helpful. So really, it's exciting where all these discussions are going and feeding into the UN processes. Thank you so much, Jainaba. Now I would like to invite His Excellency Jean-Paul Adam for his closing remarks. So you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Barasso, and thank you, first of all, to all of the panelists. Thank you to all of the participants, and particularly, I think, the very stimulating points that have been raised in the chat and in the Q&A. I will just, I think Janaiba has done a very good summary, so I will not go over again the key elements, but I will select maybe a few areas that I would like us to keep as food for thought for the way forward. First, in terms of process, Janaiba already mentioned the Summit for the Future, but I think we have a group of people in this webinar who are very interested and have shared fantastic perspectives, and we have a network of think tanks. So please, we would invite any intellectuals or academics, please contribute articles that can be jointly published with the United Nations. And also, please feel free, and I've posted in the chat, the interim report of the High-Level Advisory Board on Artificial Intelligence, which was launched by the UN Secretary General. It's an interim report. Therefore, states, civil society, academia, private sector can all contribute towards the outcome of this report, which really looks at that balance between risk and opportunity, which looks at what are the safeguards that are required, the regulations, the policy frameworks, to both enable and, in some cases, limit the impact of artificial intelligence. But like with any, the UN is only a collection of states. It is not a super state. So it depends on the inputs from everyone to improve this collective decision-making and this collective recommendations that will emerge from that report. I think a few other cross-cutting elements that I will mention. Firstly, the role of the private sector being absolutely critical is recognized. The role as well of young people in particular, and I think a few panelists mentioned the demographic dividend. And I noted in the chat, this leads to concerns also of job losses. Does artificial intelligence lead to those losses? I think the main challenge in Africa currently is actually not so much the risk of job losses, but how do we create the jobs that are needed? And this goes down to the point of AI as a potential disruptor, as a change of the economic model, where how do we create the jobs of the future? And certainly, if we remain in the status quo, we will not achieve it. And I would just cite the example, it's quite typical. There is a country, which I will not give the name, that has 90% of its revenues from fossil fuel exports, but fossil fuels contribute less than 1% jobs in that country. This is the challenge of African economies. Where we are earning today firstly does not suffice, but it is not creating the jobs of the future. Artificial intelligence without proper guidance will not create those jobs. But if we deploy them in the transformative sectors, such as energy, such as food production, and mobilizing the finance that we need, we can make a difference. There are concerns that artificial intelligence also is very energy intensive, but I think, as already mentioned, our continent and generally modes of generating energy are energy intensive, but renewables in particular are now not only becoming more efficient, but less costly as well. So in terms of the future, if we are going to leverage technologies, it's also about decarbonizing our energy grids. To conclude, we need strong policy frameworks, enabling environments, and we need to be actively looking at where we're going to generate growth, which is going to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals. We are not on that pathway yet, and we have the opportunity to dramatically shape the future. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup, et toutes nos félicitations aux panélistes.
I'd like to congratulate all of the panelists and all of those who have contributed to this, especially to our moderator. Thank you so much. Congratulations to you. Thank you, Excellency. I'd like to thank everyone, all of the panelists, all the participants. I'd like to remind you that this webinar was organized by ACBF, the think tank, ATPS, UNOSAF, of course, CAPEC in Cote d'Ivoire, and ACOT. We would like to thank all of these bodies. And this brings to an end today's webinar. I hope you have a very good afternoon and evening. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bonne journée pour ceux qui sont dans le dehors et bonne soirée.
Merci beaucoup.
Have a good evening.
Everyone.